The Galactic Arena was known for one thing above all else: fairness. The rules were clear: no weapons. Everything was settled with sheer strength, intelligence, and ingenuity. My name is Thrax Vorn, and for 20 standard cycles, I have served as a senior observer in the galactic trials. I've seen it all. From massive creatures with scales harder than diamonds to genetically engineered warriors, the galaxy is a melting pot of deadly beings. But nothing prepared me for the arrival of the human delegation. I had always believed that no species could endure the trials without some sort of natural advantage. The Ivrek, with their 6 arms and hardened skin, had evolved to survive on a planet where everything was a threat. The Zentrals, with their manipulation of time, could halt the flow of seconds to gain the upper hand. And the Ferath, with their ability to disappear into shadows, were the perfect assassins. All of them were bred for combat. They were warriors. Then came Alara Solis. She entered the arena wearing a simple black combat suit, her brown hair tied in a low ponytail. She was human, and to put it bluntly, she didn't belong in the proving grounds. She stood at just 1.6 meters tall, her body lean and compact, far from the towering, muscular giants she would face. No claws, no natural armor, no deadly abilities to speak of. Only her eyes, sharp, focused, and eerily calm. As the other champions made their way to the arena, preparing for their trials, I couldn't help but laugh. What was she thinking? How could a human possibly survive the first challenge, let alone the entire trial? Thrax, my assistant Slick, a nervous Nor, whispered in my ear, "Are you sure about this? We've never had a human in the trials. What if she gets?" "Relax," I said, my voice dripping with condescension. "Humans have only just learned to travel among the stars. They're explorers, not warriors. This will be over quickly." The first challenge began. The competitors were tasked with navigating a treacherous gorge, a deep ravine filled with unpredictable winds, shifting rocks, and violent, deadly currents. It was the perfect trial to test strength, endurance, and agility. The Ivrek charged forward, their massive bodies utilizing every inch of the terrain, digging their claws into the rock to scale the cliffs. The Zentrals moved like lightning, using their time manipulation to dart ahead of their competitors, leaving them behind. The Ferath glided through the shadows, their movements so smooth they seemed to vanish entirely. And then there was Alara. She didn't rush. She didn't charge forward like the others. She studied the ravine, taking in the wind patterns, the terrain, and the flow of water. It was as if she was observing the landscape from a different perspective, calculating every move before making it. The Ivrek, with their brute strength, were the first to falter. They misjudged a gust of wind and were blown off balance, losing precious time. The Zentrals, despite their speed, encountered a sudden rockslide that blocked their path. The Ferath, too, were caught in a surprise trap that sent them reeling. But Alara? She navigated the gorge with eerie precision. She didn't make any sudden moves. She didn't overexert herself. She moved like she had all the time in the world. It was as though she understood the gorge itself, each gust of wind, each shift of the rocks, as if the entire arena were an extension of her senses. By the time the Ivrek reached the halfway point, Alara was nearing the finish line. I couldn't believe it. She had outpaced the Ivrek. She had outpaced everyone. When the challenge ended, Alara stood victorious, while the others struggled to finish. The audience was in stunned silence. The council members, who had been so confident in the superiority of the other species, were now visibly unnerved. This human, who was supposed to be an easy target, had just completed the first challenge without breaking a sweat. As the next challenge began, hand-to-hand combat in the arena, the stakes grew higher. Her opponent was the Ferath, a predator who could meld into the shadows and strike from any angle. The Ferath were masters of stealth, and their strikes were fatal. I was certain this would be the end for Alara. No one could defeat the Ferath in close combat. They were too fast, too deadly. But Alara didn't hesitate. She stepped onto the platform, rolling her shoulders as if she was preparing for a sparring match, not a life-or-death struggle. The Ferath lunged at her, its claws extended, aiming for her throat. But Alara wasn't there anymore. In one swift motion, she twisted her body, ducking under the Ferath's strike, then using the creature's momentum to throw it to the ground. The crowd gasped. The Ferath was disoriented, its claws scraping the arena floor as it tried to regain its balance. Alara, without hesitation, moved in. She locked the Ferath's arm and twisted, using a move I had only seen in ancient human martial arts. The Ferath howled in pain, but Alara didn't let go. She was precise, controlled, and brutal in her efficiency. In less than a minute, the Ferath was subdued, its struggles futile against her technique. The crowd was silent. The Ivrek delegation had no words. The Zentrals looked confused. The Ferath, defeated, limped off the arena, its pride shattered. Alara stood there, breathing heavily, but calm. And so it went, each challenge escalating in intensity. The third challenge was a psychological test, the Maze of Shadows. A labyrinth filled with illusions, hallucinations, and traps designed to exploit each competitor's deepest fears. It was a test of mental fortitude. The Ivrek entered first, his massive body fighting against the shifting walls and projections. But as the maze began to manipulate his mind, the weight of his responsibilities as a leader overwhelmed him. He stumbled, hesitated, and began to falter under the pressure. The Zentrals, despite their ability to manipulate time, found their greatest fear, the loss of control, amplified by the maze. They struggled to maintain their composure, their once certain steps now hesitant and erratic. Alara, on the other hand, entered the maze with a calmness I had never seen. The walls shifted, the projections grew darker, more personal, but Alara simply breathed, her movements slow and deliberate. When the maze showed her loved ones, people she had lost, she didn't react. She closed her eyes, steadied her breath, and kept moving. I watched in disbelief. The others panicked, but Alara? She moved with purpose. She had mastered herself. She wasn't just reacting, she was adapting. It wasn't fear that drove her forward, it was control, an understanding that this maze, these illusions, couldn't hurt her. She emerged from the maze first. The others were still lost in their own mental turmoil. The final challenge came down to Alara and Gorge the Ivrek, a fight to the death. The size difference was comical. Gorge stood nearly 3 meters tall, a hulking behemoth of bone and muscle. Alara was just over 1.6 meters, her body battered from the previous challenges, but still standing tall. The battle was fierce. Gorge charged, his claws slashing through the air, his roars echoing through the arena. Alara, however, didn't flinch. She moved with a fluidity that defied her size, ducking under Gorge's attacks, her body weaving through the onslaught. Each move was a calculated strike, targeting his weak points, exploiting the gaps in his natural armor. The crowd was on edge. Gorge, despite his overwhelming size and strength, couldn't land a solid blow. His frustration grew, but Alara remained calm. With a swift movement, she swept his leg, using his own momentum to send him crashing to the ground. She climbed onto him, locking in a rear-naked choke hold. Gorge roared, thrashing with all his might, but Alara held on. She squeezed tighter, her arms locked around his neck with an intensity that only grew as he struggled. Gorge's movement slowed, his claws scraping against her skin, but Alara didn't let go. She didn't stop. With one final effort, Gorge's arms went limp, his body went still. The arena was silent. Alara released the choke hold and stood, victorious. The council was speechless. The Ivrek envoy was no longer boasting. They were staring at Alara with newfound respect, their arrogance shattered. I sat in my observation chair, stunned. This human, this small, unassuming human, had just defeated the greatest warriors the galaxy had to offer. And she had done it with nothing but her mind, her body, and a relentless will to succeed. As the medical teams rushed in to tend to her injuries, Alara simply smiled, a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. She had not just survived the trials, she had changed the galaxy's perception of humanity. It wasn't just the strength or the tactics. It was her spirit, the one weapon the galaxy had overlooked. The Ivrek had their claws, the Zentrals had their time manipulation, but Alara had the one thing they could never replicate, the power of sheer determination. And that, I realized, was what made her truly dangerous.